If I say rock music, I'll bet your first thought is not Christian. But film producer and author Mark Joseph argues there's been a fascinating, little-noticed culture shift in the music industry. He writes about it in his new book, Rock Gets Religion, The Battle for the Soul of the Devil's Music.
The bottom line is that religious people dropped out of pop culture somewhere, in the case of music, somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s, and created their own subculture, which we kind of derisively call Christian rock. But that phenomenon has changed as a lot of those folks came back into the mainstream music business.
What time frame are we talking about where this change has happened?
A few things happened. American Idol really was impactful in causing our rock and pop stars to be picked by people and not moguls, and in particular fairly secular moguls. The second was just an ethos was created in the religious communities to get back into the mainstream and not to be afraid or intimidated by being in the mainstream. So I think those are the key two things that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. There's a moment in American Idol history when Adam Lambert faces off against Chris Allen. And that is kind of the moment of impact, because Adam Lambert is exactly the kind of rock star that would have been chosen by the Clive Davis, David Geffens of yesteryear. Chris Allen was the nice boy next door, the born-again Christian kid who sings at his church kind of a guy. Those two faced off, and Chris Allen won the American Idol contest. That's the moment where it was clearest what was happening.
Can you give us a couple of specific examples of what you're talking about, songs we might know or be able to look up?
Well, yeah, if you look at the Grammys last year, you all of a sudden have How Great Is Our God, which is a song you would find in church on Sunday at a mega church. You don't think of it for the Grammys in the hip-hop setting.
How is it affecting us in the bigger picture? Why should we care, if at all?
Well, I think as a parent, you know, you want your kids to be getting good messages in addition to what we're used to traditionally thinking of in the rock and roll industry in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So you're getting more conservative points of view. I was kind of tipped off in the early 90s when I turned on MTV and I saw Alice Cooper walking in on a couple about to have premarital sex, and the song was called Hey Stupid. And I thought, wait a minute, this is odd to have the grandfather of rock telling a young couple to, hey, slow down a little bit.
Hey, stupid! What do you think you're doing?
I was backstage at a Megadeth tour, and it was an alcohol-free zone at the time. And I'm thinking, this is not your father's rock star.
What if people say, gosh, I hardly think of rock and roll as Christian-esque? I don't think that the songs are. In fact, I think that's sort of a rough world.
Yeah, I think rock got off to a bad start because in the 50s, the religious community was freaked out by it, didn't know what to make of it, and resorted to burning records. And so you ended up with this unnecessarily hostile relationship between rock and religion.
Follow my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
I think it's taken time for the religious leaders to go, wait a minute, we can utilize this. This can be part of what we do. Rock shouldn't be our enemy. And I think it's taken probably 20, 30, 40 years for them to figure that out and be more hospitable. In particular, religious leaders, I can give you an example of Elvis Presley. His pastor allegedly gave him the choice of, you've got to quit rock and roll if you want to follow God. Alice Cooper's leadership was a different ethos of stay put, just change the content, but the form itself is not evil.
Are there some who think this is a negative trend?
Sure. If you're a person who doesn't like the idea of religion being in pop culture, this is your ultimate nightmare because it's everywhere and it's only increasing.
Holy is the Lord.
And the notion of that you have to separate or leave your religion at the door before you enter the public square is sort of an idea of yesteryear. And believe it or not, Hollywood is much more open to this.
Are you a religious guy?
I don't know if I'm religious, but I suppose I attend church. But I'm certainly a fan of the marrying of the two. I think nothing is more exhilarating than a deeply spiritual song. And so I'm definitely a fan of them joining forces and seeing what comes out of it.
Joseph also notes that hip-hop music now carries a significant mix of orthodox religious messages delivered in the language of the street.